and welcome back to Unfuck Your Co-Parenting with me, Libby North. If you're new here, I talk all about things that have to do with co-parenting when you're co-parenting with somebody who's toxic, narcissistic, whatever. And you also know I'll get political. Watch my TikToks and Instagram and all that. I do not get political because if you're divorcing somebody who is a toxic, narcissistic asshole, it does not matter who you fucking voted for. It doesn't matter how you feel about abortion or schools or whatever. You don't deserve that. Nobody fucking does. But I am going to kind of dip my toe in just a teeny tiny bit because if you haven't heard, the Heritage Foundation has put out a new report and it's a fucking doozy. This one's called Saving America by Saving the Family. And if you don't know who the Heritage Foundation is, they are a policy think tank that put out Project 2025, which basically the president has implemented almost all of ours in the process of implementing a bunch of. And so the reason that matters, whether or not you voted for Trump, I don't care. But it means that people in powerful positions listen to the Heritage Foundation and are taking them seriously. So this policy paper, which is very similar to a lot of other ones they put out that have been enacted, is really important for you to understand. Now, this thing is 130 some pages long, and it has a lot of fucking shit in it. Everything from how dating apps are ruining our social structure to why we should not allow kids to have social media. There's a lot in there. I am definitely not unpacking it all right now. What I am going to unpack are the things that most likely, if you are watching this channel, affect you because you have dared to go through a divorce. And this policy paper is called pro-family. And when something's called pro-family, most of us want to assume it's for the good of the children. But policies don't exist in theory. They exist in real homes, real courtrooms, and real childhoods. And this report, if it's going to be enacted in the way that it's recommended, could have significantly horrific effects on all of those things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go through this report, kind of claim by claim, and we're going to talk about the actual facts. Because if you don't know, my background prior to my parallel parenting coaching career was actually in statistics, data, and policy. So I kind of feel a more imperative to do it. So anyway, that's it. Let's get into this shit. All right. So claim number one, marriage, which should be between a man and a woman raising their biological children, is the ideal family structure. And the report explicitly defines ideal family as a married man and woman raising biological children. And they just fucking exclude step parents, adoptive parents. Heaven forbid we talk about same sex parents and as equally valid or a protective family structure. They just want to frame the millions of children living in the United States that are right outside this model as kind of fucked. And let's talk about how big this is, because according to the US Census, 40% of children will spend some time living in a step family, which include my children and my partner's kids. Over 5 million children live with a grandparent or other non-biological caregiver. 5 fucking million. More than 200,000 children are being raised by same-sex parents. And approximately 2 million kids are adopted or are in some sort of permanent guardianship arrangement. And we're not even talking about the poor kids in fucking foster care. So if policy treats one family structure as legitimate, it just risks marginalizing humongous shares of people and real families and real kids that are just going to be discounted as unideal. And let's talk about what the data actually shows about these non-biological and non-traditional families, because I would love to get up here and get all emotional about how I believe my family structure is beautiful because we're just growing this awesome family. But there's fucking facts behind this. Let's start with adoptive parents. There have been large, peer reviewed studies that show that adopted children raised in stable, supportive homes do just as well or better than children raised in comparable biological families. Once early trauma and socioeconomic factors are accounted for. And let's have just a quick word on that because this goes to one of the main rules of statistics. If any of you guys remember that shit from high school or whenever the fuck we took it, correlation doesn't equal causation, right? Just because children who happen to be in a two-parent household happen to do better does not mean that those two things caused each other. They are correlated. But two families being together also increases, I don't know, family income, economic stability, all other things that are factors, and we will get into in a little bit, that cause them. So even when, and this study, what it did was it controlled for those socioeconomic variables and ACEs, which again we'll get into, and found that sometimes adopted kids even had better outcomes. Probably because there were things that they couldn't control for like how badly they wanted the kids and things like that. So anyway, adoption is associated with improved educational attainment, better health outcomes, and emotional stability compared to remaining in unsafe and unstable biological homes. So essentially, what this is saying is the quality of parenting and post adoption stability matter far more than biological relatedness. So, in other words, it's not biology that protects kids, it's consistency and responsive caregiving. And I would love to hear from you guys in the comments who maybe are children of supportive adoptive parents, whether or not you feel like you were kind of shitty or because your parents didn't physically birth you and oh my God, heaven forbid they weren't married. All right, moving on to step parents and blended families, which again, I am very passionate about. So, step families are often cited as some of the highest risk environments, but data is super nuanced on this, right? Because children in high conflict blended families can struggle, but so do children in high conflict intact families, which I don't even like fucking using the word intact. But if you actually look and are able to separate out some of these other ACEs, which again, we will talk about, low conflict step family, child outcomes are comparable to those in low conflict biological families. If you take out and control for other factors like economic stability, whether or not they're going to actually be exposed to adult conflict, the greatest predictor of harm is instability and unresolved adult conflict, not the presence of a step parent. It doesn't matter. Yes, a step parent might be more likely to do X, Y, and Z thing, but it is not the fact that they are a step parent. It is other things. So, especially in high conflict divorce cases where children may experience less stress in a calm blended household than a legally intact one that's hostile, full of people yelling at each other all the time. I don't know. Fucking think about it. All right. And I saved my favorite for last, same sex partners. Oh my God. There have been decades of research across psychology, sociology, pediatrics that consistently show children raised by same sex couples perform just as well as children raised by opposite sex couples in measures of emotional health, academic performance, behavioral adjustment, and social functioning. Like all of those areas, it was equal. So, yeah, major professional organizations, including the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Psychological Association, concluded that parental sexual orientation is not a predictor of child outcomes. What is a predictor of child outcomes? Stability, lack of conflict, emotional warmth, and fucking economic security. So, excluding same sex partners for a pro family framework ignores large and well established evidence. And also, and I'll kind of go off on a tangent, they also want to get rid of IVF, which kind of doesn't make sense to me, but like, it ignores so much information. Okay. Claim number 2. Divorce is inherently harmful to children. Listen, we're going to talk about ACEs. So, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. This is the Center for Disease Control, or CDC. This is their framework that they use which essentially there are 10 ACEs, or things that kids can be exposed to before the age of 18. And for each one that they're exposed to, they get 1 point. The higher your score, the worse your outcomes are. And this has been borne out over lots and lots of studies by the CDC, Kaiser Permanente. And yes, parental separation due to divorce is an ACE. But there are 9 others, and sometimes separation due to divorce will decrease other ACEs. So what are the actual ACEs? They fall into a couple different categories. There's 3 categories: abuse, neglect, and household challenges. So underneath abuse, you have the first 3. So emotional abuse, which would be a child being regularly insulted, humiliated, sworn at, made to be afraid of physical abuse. You have physical abuse and sexual abuse. And I'm really hoping I don't have to go too hard into those, because those fucking just kill my soul. Then there's neglect. And again, neglect comes in 2 different forms. There's physical neglect, which is just not having enough food, clean clothing, medical care, supervision. And then there's also emotional neglect, feeling unloved, unsupported, that no one in the family cares or protects the child, or maybe they're not cared for by one of the caregivers. Then there is domestic violence. And I want you guys to pay real close attention to that family challenges category, because this is where we're going to see a lot of one causes the other. Witnessing a parent or caregiver being physically harmed by another adult in the household. Substance abuse in the household. Living with anyone who happens to have a serious alcohol or drug problem is an ACE. Mental illness in the household. Living with someone who's depressed, mentally ill, or someone who attempts suicide, and an incarcerated member of the family. So somebody, a parent or household member, going to jail or prison. Every single one of those ACEs, all 9, because remember the 10th is separation, all 9 can happen in a married family. All 9 of them. And this report does not fucking talk about how we're going to reduce the other 9. And as we will get into, some of those actually decrease when you allow women and men to get divorced through no fault. So let's move on to claim number 3, because you can tell I'm fucking itching to get to it. No fault divorce weakens the family. This claim is like directly fucking contradicted by empirical data. So when the US states adopted unilateral no fault divorce laws, researchers, yes, they saw a small bump in the amount of divorces, but you know what they did see? And by the way, that increase was not sustained. It was not a long-term increase. It was a bump. But you know what they did see? 30% decline in domestic violence. 30% decline in domestic violence. Remember what one of those ACEs scores was? I think it was the kids witnessing domestic violence. If you allow people to get divorced through no fault, and again, they're not even taking away the ability to get divorced. We're talking about just the no fault divorce. Reduces domestic violence. It reduces female suicide rates. So this is the suicide rates of the mother or female caregiver in the household, somewhere between 8 and 16%. Mental health, right? Seeing somebody attempt suicide, this reduces it. And then my favorite, reduction in your intimate partner homicides. So domestic violence, 30%, it reduces your romantic domestic partner killing you by 10%. I just want you to ask yourselves right now, what do you think is going to be slightly more traumatic for a child? Mommy and daddy getting divorced? Or one of them killing each other and you losing a parent forever? It's not, and again, importantly, these long-term studies showed no increase in like divorce rates, no long-term increase, there was a bump. But for welfare, when it comes to exposure to those domestic violent and serious cases, it dramatically reduced them. And I don't think any one of us is going around going like, I wish I could increase the rate of women that are committing suicide. Okay, yes, I actually know that there are people who go around saying that, and nobody should be taking policy advice from that. Anyway, policies that restrict exit from unsafe relationships increase children's exposure to toxic stress, which, according to the CDC, Kaiser Permanente, and a fuck ton of other studies, decreases the great outcomes that our children could have in the future. Also, it's just fucking common sense. Gee, okay. Lane number 4. Keeping families intact protects the kids. And again, this assumes that family unity equals family safety. And it's going to be real similar to the one I just said up above, because again, the ACE research shows the exact opposite is true when you are in a high conflict home. When children are exposed to chronic hostility, fear, intimidation, emotional manipulation, loyalty binds, which is where they feel like they need to like one parent more than the other, or prolonged legal conflict, which we're also going to get to here in a second, they're experiencing what I would call, and some other researchers, toxic stress. Toxic stress affects brain development, emotional regulation, long-term physical health. A legally intact family with chronic conflict is going to generate way more ACEs in that one separation. A separated family that reduces conflict but provides consistent caregiving, even if it is only 50% of the time, is going to generate fewer fucking ACEs. Claim number 5, only traditional marriage reduces childhood poverty and instability. So this one, and I appreciated the fact that this report did point out the links between childhood poverty and adverse effects. The problem is that it linked childhood poverty to divorce and not necessarily to other things. And I will say, absolutely, divorce often reduces household income, mostly for women. Women's household incomes drop. And I mean, this is a whole gender gap thing. It drops by approximately 40 to 50% post-divorce compared to men. That usually drops about 20 to 30%. Again, it kind of depends on where you get your numbers. I couldn't find one source that I loved the numbers for, but it was generally the same area. This is not evidence that marriage itself is the solution, because research shows income loss, housing instability, school disruption, all of that account for much of the observed harm. And it wasn't necessarily the divorce itself. So I don't know why we're not talking a little bit more about like child support enforcement, stable housing, healthcare access, educational continuity, those things that could be a lot more effective than the temporary. And again, I would like to stress the reduction in income can be temporary. So, anyway, all of these are far more effective in protecting children than policies that just make divorce harder or exclude non-traditional families. Getting tired yet? Getting depressed yet? Claim number 6. Ending no-fault divorce is going to strengthen the family. And I mean, like, if you haven't caught on now, this claim completely ignores how divorce actually works in practice. So without no-fault divorce, and I'm going to guess the majority of you watching this got a no-fault divorce, even if there had been fault you could have proven. But if you don't have a no-fault divorce and you want to get a divorce, you have to prove fault. And it's going to vary state by state, but in most of these are abuse, adultery, or cruelty, and you got to prove it in court. And again, if any of you have ever fucking been to court, it's a long fucking process. It can take years to go through a no-fault divorce with somebody who's toxic and narcissistic. Could you imagine If you actually had to prove that they cheated on you, that they abused you, or that, I mean, cruelty, like, it's gonna take for fucking ever. And you know what happens when a divorce takes even fucking longer? Legal costs increase substantially because you're gonna have to do additional discovery, even more testimony. You're gonna have to go to more hearings. And guess what? Your legal costs are higher. I bet your household income is going to go down. And I think that was one of those things that the Heritage Foundation really thought was going to, you know, help. So maybe, I don't know, maybe figure out that. But also, court cases escalate conflict. It doesn't de-escalate them. So all of this talk about how we need to be making a happy, stable home for the kids, the longer you fight, like, come on, all of us who've been through this, the longer you fight, the harder it is to be nice to the fucking asshole you're trying to divorce, right? So even though you're still going to go off and have these horrific adverse outcomes for your children because you have one ACE score and you're making sure that they're not getting a 6 or a 7 on that thing because you're taking them away from all the other bullshit. It's insanity to me. This is not theoretical. It is how fault-based systems function. So again, just to recap, make it harder to get divorced, those of us who still try are going to have longer court cases. Because again, I bet you the majority of us who did the no-fault divorce had a fault we could have proven, but thank God we didn't have to because we saved ourselves hundreds of thousands of dollars and probably years of our life. And what does this mean for the kids, right? It just means more adversarial divorce is more parental conflict. More time living in uncertainty, not knowing whose house they're going to be at. Do we have to sell the house? Is mommy getting child support? So do we have enough money for X, Y, and Z? More financial depletion in the household, more stress, instability, more loyalty binds, which is a whole nother thing. So from an ACE perspective, prolonged litigation increases the exposure to emotional abuse or to conflict, both of which we know are not great. It can also increase emotional neglect, chronic stress, and just, I mean, it causes more harm than good. I think we've kind of been that. All right. So if I wanted to sum all of this up, here's essentially what the evidence actually says. Children thrive in low conflict, emotionally safe, stable environments. ACEs, all of them, are driven by chronic stress without protection. And it is not about the family structure. No fault divorce reduces violence, reduces suicide, and it doesn't increase the divorce rates long term. Adoptive parents, step parents, same sex parents, they can raise kids to do just as well when stability is present. So making divorce harder just makes conflict longer. It makes it costlier, and it makes it worse for the kids. So when it comes to talking about saving families, the real question is, are we reducing conflict to protect the children, or are we just extending and worsening the adult conflict in a way that just increases harm? Policies that trap families into high conflict systems don't save them, they ruin them by increasing ACEs, deepening poverty, and exposing children to more and not less stress. And this has been my soapbox on this report. I would love to hear what you guys think. Tell me down below. Are you a step parent, biological parent? Like what are your thoughts on this? And what do you think that I've missed? And as always, make sure to follow me on socials, check out some of my other videos. And thanks for hanging in there with me, because as always, we just have to get through this shit together.